So I'm going to be talking about just tips and things to think about when applying for graduate or professional school. If you are in high school and thinking and getting ready to apply for college, whenever I say graduate or professional school, just replace it in your head with college, and that will, suffice, because a lot of the things that you're going to need to do are going to be the same. It's just that I'm gearing this more towards our college students. So I just talk about this as being more school for you. Tips for applying for graduate and professional school. I start this talk kind of in a weird place, which is I start talking about why you want to go to graduate school or why you want to go to professional school. And, I think this comic, if after this, you want to go check out the PhD comic strip, it's a good time for everyone, right? Graduate school is not going to be easy. And there are going to be times where you just ask yourself why you're doing it. And having a good reason to be there in the first place will help you through those times, right? So when you're, sitting in some unlit basement or poorly lit basement, questioning why you're in grad school, and you find out you're just doing the wrong problems, being there for the right reasons is going to help you out, right? So I've been doing this for a while now, and there's a lot of reasons why people say they want to go to graduate school or professional school, and a lot of them are bad, right? They'll say something like, well, doctors make a lot of money. Well, yeah, but if you don't like being a doctor, it doesn't matter how much money you make. Being a professor looks easy. I mean, I do get the summers off, but it's not all that easy all the time, right? I've had people tell me that someone in their family told them they should be a doctor or a pharmacist or a dentist or whatever, and this student wanted to be an English major and wanted to write. And it's like, well, you're not going to be happy as fill in the blank, not a writer. So it's not a good reason to go to school. And then I don't know if I can get a job, the hiding from the world in hopes of a better economy when you come out, right? So let's talk about getting the bag, if you will, or not getting it, right? So if you're like, being a professor looks easy or doctors make a bunch of money, well, let's look at who makes the most money on a college campus. You've got your tenured and untenured faculty down towards the bottom, more than grad students, right? But if you really want to make money, you should just stop this now and go start playing Madden and really get your football strategy down, because where the money is at is being a football coach. And this is from 2008. I do believe that bar graph is a little bit even stretched further, right? So, your professors aren't doing this for the money. They're doing it for some other reason, right? The hiding from the economy, this graph is great. I'm sure it still tracks. This is from about a decade ago now. You can follow the blue line, which is enrollments in graduate school in science and engineering, and it tracks with the unemployment in the nation, right? These are all people that were like, oh man, unemployment is really high. I should go to graduate school and hope for a better economy when I come out. That worked sometimes. I went to graduate school in 2002. Things were good. I came out in 2008 and things were awful. They were not good at all. So sometimes that doesn't work out. If you try to hide, you can pop out of your hidey hole of academia at the worst possible time, right? So like I say, you want to go to grad school for the right reasons, right? You want to go for the love of the game. You want to go because you love what you're doing, right? And that you're going to get something rewarding out of it for those 4 to, 8 years of additional schooling, right? So in graduate school, you are going to run into times where it is really difficult. And you're going to ask yourself some days, like, why am I doing this? What have I got myself into? And you're going to ask yourself, is it worth it, right? And if it's something that's important to you, if like learning that field or getting those techniques is really important to you, that's going to be something that you're going to be able to say, like, yes, this is worth it. And you're going to get through those days where, every reaction you've run has just not worked, or you've worked for 3 weeks and nothing has worked and you don't know what you're doing wrong, right? You're gonna be like, no, this is what I want to do, and you're gonna work through it. So I love this slide. You're actually going to see it in the next talk as well. This is by a guy who was in Utah or Utah State named Matthew Might. And it just talks about what going to graduate school is really all about. So we start up in the top left and we have all of human knowledge, right? That's everything we know, right? And when you're in elementary school, you just learn a little bit, right? You go to high school, you know a little bit more. You go to college, and you pick the major, right? So you specialized in a field. So you learned a little bit more about everything, but you really specialized in one area. And so you kind of pushed out in one direction towards a certain specialty. And if you get a master's degree, you pushed even further, right? And if you go on to your PhD, right, your job as a PhD student isn't to just learn stuff, it's to make new knowledge, right? So you go to your PhD, you start reading papers and you start to learn everything there is to know about your particular field, right? And then you start to push on what that known knowledge is, and you work and you work and you work, and eventually you make something new, bottom left-hand corner, right? And you push the world's knowledge out ever so slightly, right? You've just made the circle in your one little spot of your field a little bit bigger, right? And if enough of us do that, right, with enough PhDs and enough research in all different fields, the circle gets bigger and we learn more stuff, right? But your particular PhD is, in the grand scheme of that circle, right in the bottom right-hand corner, it's there, but you really don't see it. It's the work of a bunch of people that make that circle bigger, right? I worked on making an anti-malarial drug that got into animal testing. We learned a lot about that molecule, but I'm pretty sure no one has ever read my thesis, right? I pushed the knowledge out a little bit in the world, and someone in that research group is going to build on it and hopefully do something. But it's not like we make these giant steps. We make these little steps. So when you're a PhD student, that's what you're doing. You're just pushing that boundary of knowledge a little bit further. And for this guy, he points out that his son has an untreatable disease right now. And his hope, right, is you can look at being a PhD is the knowledge needed to save his son is outside the circle of everything people know, right? But if enough people do enough research, one day that circle is going to push out past the knowledge to save his son, and we'll have the information to be able to save his son. So like big picture, you can look at your PhD or going to graduate school as a way to make the world better. But the whole standing on the shoulders of giants things, right? Everyone has done something before you that gives you the knowledge to push forward. And then what you've done is going to give someone else the leg up to push that knowledge out to help someone's kid or to figure out how to have green energy or whatever the thing is that you're passionate about, right? And I think those things are bigger than like, I'm going to make a whole bunch of money, right? So this is where, again, still the scared straight portion, right? Going to graduate school or professional school is not easy, right? You have this guy here who on one hand is telling you the words he's saying are telling you to come work for this research advisor, but his sign is telling you, no, don't do it. It's really bad, right? This is my wife. This is my wife when she was in med school. She lived in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and went to Penn State. And I lived in Myrtle Beach and taught chemistry at Coastal. And she came to visit me. This was our visit. She was just studying. She drove 10 hours to study in a new and exciting place. I was like, hey, let's go out for lunch and get you out of here. She was like, okay. So this on the right is us at Gordon Biersch, going to lunch with her studying flashcards, right? So you're going to do a lot of work, right? So if I haven't scared you off, you still want to go, this is still what you're about, what do you need to do, right? I think the first and simplest thing is you need to focus on getting high scores. You need to focus on making sure that you have the measurables that graduate schools are going to want, right? So most graduate schools, like PhD and master's programs, are going to want you to have a 3.0 GPA. Often they will just calculate your GPA in your field. So they may throw out like basket weaving or, kickball or whatever, like, gen ed classes you took that have padded your GPA, and they may just calculate your GPA within like science if you're going in for a science PhD. We've visited MUSC a few times, and the head of the graduate program there, Dr. Wright, has mentioned that for their PhD programs in MUSC, they really are looking for a 3.5 a science GPA. So they're going to throw out all of your fluff classes and just look at your science, and they want you to have a 3.5. The reason that kind of a good graduate school has that 3.0 GPA average, sorry, my cats are playing with toys behind me, is that, right, a C in graduate school is failing. So if you go for a graduate, into a graduate program, you have to graduate with a 3.0. So if you've not been able to maintain a 3.0 in undergrad, it is doubtful that you'll be able to maintain a 3.0 in graduate school when the coursework is more rigorous. So they have that cutoff just to make sure that you are going to be successful. Now, professional schools, so we're talking medical school, dental school, pharmacy school are kind of the big three. They're going to have a higher GPA requirement. They're going to be looking at 3.5 to 4.0 typically, right? And then they're going to look at your entry scores. So this is GRE, MCAT, PCAT, and the DAT. So the best thing for those is to start studying early. Once you've made the decision that you want to go to medical school or graduate school, starting to study a year out for those exams is going to be particularly helpful. The reason this is the first thing I'm listing is this is the easiest filter that a program can use, right? A typical program is going to get hundreds, if not thousands of applications, and they can't look at all of them, right? But what they can do is they can run a filter early on to say, well, we don't want to see anyone who doesn't have this GPA in this test score. So if you don't kind of meet those minimum requirements or fall in the window that they want to look at, you might not get seen by an actual person maybe at all or early enough in the process for your application to really make an impact. Right. So when we look at scores for for schools that are popular with CCU students, so these are all from last year's incoming classes. So at MUSC, the average GPA of the incoming class for, I believe it was 2020, was a 3.74. Sorry, 2019 was a 3.74 and an MCAT score of 509. UNC Greenville and UNC Columbia were similar in both GPA and MCAT score. So they were all pretty close. The pharmacy school at MUSC had a 3.5 GPA and a PCAT in the 70th percentile. So I went to Dr. Williams last year when I gave this talk in, I guess, the fall. Our average MCAT score for all applicants at CCU is a 497. Our average MCAT score, if you get accepted, is right around a 500, 501 range. Our 50th percentile, so kind of our smack dab average student or 50th percentile right in the middle, is 495. And our range runs from 472 to 513. And the national 50th percentile is 500. So coastal are a little bit below the national average. So if you come to the pre-health advisory committee at coastal or at your school, and they are like, you need to get a 500 minimum on your MCAT to be competitive, the reason they're telling you that, or the reason we're telling you that as the pre-health advisory committee, is our scores say that a 500 gets you in if you're a coastal student, and below that doesn't. And so, we need you right around that 500 for you to have the best possible chance. And the best way to do that is to start early on your studying. To say that I'm going to study for 6 weeks after graduation, you're just throwing away $300 on your MCAT or however much it costs to take it now. Right? You need to really start 6 months to a year in advance of studying and coming up with a good regimen so that you can get that score that you need. Now, who's to blame for MCAT scores? Students are going to blame the faculty, say we did a bad job. Faculty are going to blame the students and say that they didn't study enough. I'm sure, there's blame to go around, but these are just the numbers that we have. And knowing that, the best thing you can do to kind of overcome that is to put in the work and study. Right? If you don't have the high scores, it can just be game over. Again, I've been given permission from my wife to talk about her scores. So she took the MCAT on the old scoring system, and she got a 27, which was equivalent to a 500 on the current scoring system. It was basically the average, or like the average accepted score at that time. But she did really well in the verbal and I think the analytical section. I do believe that's the right section. But she did poorly in the general science section and physical sciences. She got a 6, right? And 7 was kind of the accepted number. She got an 11, 10, 6, I do believe was her score, where 9 was the average. And I think that 6 just eliminated her from multiple schools without her application really being looked at. So just that one score being a little low probably disqualified her from at least a third to a half of her schools without her application really getting a thorough vetting. Okay, so how can you make yourself different so you can stand out when you're applying to graduate school or professional school? So I think the big thing for graduate schools is you want to have that strong research background. You want to have at least a year, if not more, research experience. Ideally, you'd want to have a year in the same research group so you can develop a really strong understanding of your project and what you were doing and be able to really talk about it well. You want to be able to do presentations. So hopefully your faculty are pushing you to present your research on campus or at regional meetings or national meetings, just to get somewhere else for you to have taken your results, put them in a poster or a presentation form and talked about it, right? And if you can get a publication, that's great. I've had a few students that I think were kind of eliminated from the application process at a few really high-end departments because they didn't have publications. Publication's a much higher bar than a presentation, but can go a really long way when you are applying. So professional schools, they want research as well. Here, I would say that you don't need to do, a lot of people think research, they think bench chemistry and working in the lab, but you could do research in public health. You could do research doing quality improvement at a hospital if you're interested in going to medical school. There are other forms of research that aren't just in a chemistry lab or in a biology lab doing basic science. There's applied stuff that also is valued by professional schools. That if that's the thing that you're into, by all means do that. You need to be active in the field. I always say that a medical school, a dental school, pharmacy school, they're trying to take a class of 150 people and they want to turn out 150 professionals in 4 years, right? They don't want you to get through your first semester of medical school and go, sick people are gross, right? They want you to have been experienced in the field and for you to have a sense of what you're getting into before you actually start. So this is where you want to shadow someone in your field if possible. You want to volunteer just to get a sense of the field. And if you can, you work in the field. So we've had a number of students that are scribes, so they get some experience in the medical field that way. I've had students that become pharmacy techs and work in pharmacies before they go on to pharmacy school. In South Carolina, you need a printer and I think $40, and you can become a pharmacy tech. You just have to print out a form, say you're not a criminal, and send $40 to the state, and they will send you back a certificate to be a pharmacy tech. And for a lot of local pharmacies like Walgreens and CVS, that's all you need to be able to work as a pharmacy tech. If you have someone who's willing to train you a bit, you can be back there doing a lot of what a pharmacist does as an undergrad. Volunteer. It doesn't have to be in the field. Just show that you're like civically minded. Because again, a lot of like being a doctor or a pharmacist or a dentist or anything like that is giving back to your community. And you're doing it hopefully because you want to help people. So, you can volunteer doing stuff and show that this is, that you're that kind of person. Don't feel like there's a certain box of volunteering that you have to like check off and fit into. I've had students that said that they were really passionate about helping animals and that they volunteered to take care of like stray cats in their area. I was like, cool, if that's what you're passionate about, like that's going to be something that's more important to you and something you can better talk about than being like, oh, I volunteered at the hospital because I felt like I needed to. Similarly, I've had students that worked for hospice and went and just were, were someone that went into homes to talk to elderly people just to give them a friend and help them out with things. And that was something she was really passionate about. And so find that thing that you can really be passionate about and really latch onto that you can talk about when you have your applications or you write your personal statements. And be well-rounded. The kind of the House model, if you remember that show House, of just like kind of a terrible person, but it's just like a walking encyclopedia of medical knowledge. That kind of model of the doctor has kind of gone by the wayside, right? They want you to have a more holistic approach. They want you to be able to understand your patients. And so if you have kind of an unusual background, I've known people that have degrees in music or art that took the prereqs for medical school and successfully went to med school, right? They had a very different background than someone with a traditional like chemistry training or biology training in undergrad. So their application stands out because like, oh, look at this person who has this unusual track, who's going to bring a different mindset and a different point of view to their patients in their care. So where should you apply? Right? You decided you want to apply, you've got your scores, right? You've done all this stuff to be a good applicant. So where should you apply? Look at the programs, learn about where you're applying. For professional schools, I think having a good sense of what their mission statement is really important. You want to find a school or a program whose goals align with what your goals are. The example I use a lot is Johns Hopkins is a great medical school, but Johns Hopkins is very research focused. If your goal as a physician is to work with underserved communities and you're not super interested in research, maybe Johns Hopkins isn't the right school for you. Not to say you're not going to get a great education there, but maybe there's a school that has a greater focus on community medicine or working with homeless populations, or they have these kind of things that you could really latch onto and see yourself fitting in there because what you want to do matches with what that department or school says its goals are, right? For graduate school, you are applying to a department, but you're also kind of applying to a faculty member, right? When you go to graduate school, it's not like undergrad. You're going to be working in one lab for, pretty much 4, 5, 6 years. So you need to look at the faculty. You want to make sure that there are faculty that you want to work with, that their research is interesting. So I always say that you want to have multiple faculty that you can do research with, right? You want to have 3 or 4 people, ideally, that you'd be happy working for any of them. And the reason is, you know, if a person has funding for 3 students and there are 3 amazing students and you're great, but you're not amazing, you might lose out on a spot in that lab because that person's going to take the 3 amazing students and you might be on the outside looking in. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're like, well, if I can't work for Dr. Jones, I don't want to be at this school and then not get in with Dr. Jones, right? So make sure you have multiple faculty you can work with. Make sure the faculty that you're interested in working with are funded, that they're actually able to take students. You can check this. A lot of times people will have their CVs linked on their web pages. And if you go through them, they'll have what grants they've been awarded, and you can look and see if they have current grants, right? You know, if they haven't got a grant for 5 or 6 years, they might not be able to take a student, or if they can take you as a student, they might not be able to give you all the support you need to be successful, right? Does your department that you're looking to go into offer TA positions beyond the first year? So at larger schools, some of you that are at like USC, right, you're taught in labs by graduate students. And those students are usually first-year students, and it's just to help pay for them. But if your faculty member, if their grant runs out and they don't get renewed and there's 6 months where there's not grant funding, is your department able to offer a TA to you so you can teach a class as a 3rd or a 4th year and make sure that you're still going to get paid during that time, right? So how much is this going to cost, right? This is, I stress this a lot to students. If you're getting a PhD in the sciences, it really shouldn't cost you any money. I can speak pretty safely for chemistry, biology, and physics. I'm not sure of some of the social sciences, but I know those natural sciences, they will pay you. They will pay your tuition. They will pay you a stipend, and you will not have to pay for it. If someone tells you you do have to pay beyond like a a student activity fee or like parking, you are better than that. Go somewhere else, right? You should not go into debt for going to graduate school for again the hard sciences. If you're getting a master's, that varies. There are some programs. The one I always kind of go to as an example is UNC Wilmington. In their chemistry department, they have a very big, robust master's program. Most of their students are able to get TAs and have a lot of their tuition either waived or just a lot of it paid through being TAs into research positions. But some master's programs, that's not an option and you'll have to pay. It depends. I've known some students, this isn't 100% on the up and up, but I have known some students that have gone for a PhD, got into a PhD program and kind of had in the back of their head they were going to leave after 2 or 3 years and leave with a master's so they could get their master's and not pay for it. Now, some people go to get their PhD and then realize it's not for them, and after a few years they will just leave with a master's. But I've known some people that have kind of like made that their plan, right? So professional school, for the most part, it's just going to take all the money that you have, right? You have to think about when you're picking schools, right? What can you afford and how will debt impact you long term? So that's less fun, but it is something you need to think about. We'll talk about how to defer some of that cost here in a bit, right? Now, this is a personal thing. I'm sure some people will argue with me, but I've heard a lot of students say, well, it's really pretty here, or I really like the area. And for me, location doesn't really matter, right? My graduate experience was I was in the lab 10 to 12 hours a day. And so I wasn't really outside. So it didn't matter kind of where I was because I was in the lab all the time. And if you're in medical school, you're going to be studying all the time. So I always say that the location that matters is the place that you feel like you're going to get the best training and the best education, not the place that has like the coolest waterfront or is close to the mountains. All right, it's application time. So you need to make sure you give yourself options, right? Apply to as many schools as you can afford. Application fees are not cheap. They're somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $100 per school. Some graduate programs will waive your fees if you ask, and same with some medical schools if you meet certain criteria. I am friends with the graduate program director at NC State and in chemistry, and he says if you forget to mail your check, they will forget to ask for it, and they will just review your application without you having to send in your application fee. Right? The more schools you apply to, the more schools will accept you. Right? If you only apply to 2 or 3 schools, you only have a chance to get 2 or 3 acceptances. Right? You need to cast a wide net. Treat it the same way you did when you applied for undergrad, right? You need to have those aspirational schools that you're like, wow, if I get in there, that'd be amazing. I wouldn't be sure why they took me. You need to apply to the realistic schools where you're like, yep, I am like the stock average applicant to this school. I feel pretty good that I'm going to get in. And then apply to a few safety schools where, you would be the smartest person that has ever gone to that school and they'd be stupid to not take you, right? So you have this range of options, right? Because you want to be in a situation where you can say no, where you can visit a school and be like, you know what, after I've met these people and seen this department, this isn't the right place for me. You don't want to be in a situation where you only have one option. I say this speaking from experience. When I was an undergrad, I applied to 3 schools: Boston College, Penn State, and the University of Pittsburgh. I got into the University of Pittsburgh, and I knew a faculty member there, and she was like, so what do you think about Pitt? And I was like, well, Pitt's it, because it's the only place I got into. And then she was able to get me into Penn State by calling a friend. And so I had 2 options when I was making a decision that was going to impact what I was going to do for perhaps the rest of my life. I probably should have applied to 10 to 15 schools so that I would be able to visit multiple schools and kind of learn about each department, right? You need to think big. You get into none of the schools you don't apply for, right? So make a school tell you no. Don't do it for them. If you guys might remember the glorious year of Yik Yak, right? That was high comedy on Coastal's campus. And I think this illustrates the thinking big mindset. We have Mr. Electric Blunt, who was like, man, the girl at Cookout with the freckles is so pretty. And then this girl's like, yeah, well, I think that was me. Dude could have just gone up and talked to the girl with the freckles and, maybe ate his quesadilla with a friend. But instead, he went home and ate his quesadilla alone and played on Yik Yak. He did not shoot his shot, right? So with school, shoot your shot. If you think the best school for you to go to is Harvard or is, Clemson or wherever you think the best school for you is, you need to apply. You need to make them tell you no, as opposed to just being like, oh no, they won't say yes. A wise man once said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott, right? So you need to take your shots. You don't just say like, oh no, they would never take me, right? So we're going to talk about letters more on Thursday, but something I want to stress is try to personalize your letters, right? For graduate school, try to mention specific faculty and research that you're interested in, right? There's a chance that that faculty member is on the admissions committee, and maybe they're like, oh, this is cool. It's nice that this person wants to work with me. Maybe they'll look at your application a little more favorably. Discuss why the program's appealing. What things have drawn you to the program? Are there things that they're doing that are particularly interesting? Is it reputation? Just show the person reading your application that you know something about the program that you're applying to, right? For personal statements, try to incorporate for professional schools, try to incorporate the mission statement, right? It helps if your goals and what you want to do align with the program's goals are. discuss interesting aspects of the program, same kind of thing. Part of the reason I think my wife got into medical school was Penn State had a program called Global Health Scholars, where they sent students to different sites around the world to do research and to work with underserved communities. And she had experience working in as a teacher and in health clinics in Africa. And so I think that once they got past her, like, low-ish score on her MCAT, that then they saw her personal statement, which talked about her working with underserved communities around the world. And it just takes one person, this like a member of the global health scholars program, to be like, I think this student would be really good for my program. I think we should take this student, right? So I think that Penn State having that program and her having experience in something related to that was helpful to her. And I think that you can find that at a lot of programs where you can find ways for your experiences to mesh well with what that department is doing, right? Right? Remember, you're not trying to like sell yourself super hard. You're just trying to introduce yourself. So let them know about your motivation, experience, and what your future plans are. And again, I've got a whole bunch of that for the next talk, right? Don't fake anything. On your application, be 100% honest. This slide was added because we have a student who just graduated from MUSC's PhD program, and she was on the admissions committee last year, and they had a student who like faked publications on their CV. And one of the faculty members on the committee just types in references to look at papers and was typing in this person's references, and there were no papers. They did not exist, right? So don't make up papers. Don't write your own recommendation. That was another thing. They had a student who wrote their own recommendations and had the same spelling errors in all of the papers. So don't fake anything. You will get busted. This old guy with a headset on this picture is George O'Leary. Now, all of you who aren't old like me, he is before your time. But he is a football coach, and he had worked his way up from smaller jobs. He'd been at Georgia Tech. He'd done all this stuff, and he'd finally got his dream job. He was the head coach at Notre Dame. And while going to a huge school like Notre Dame means that you have way more scrutiny than you would have at another institution. And so people started looking at his resume, and they found out that he faked a bunch of stuff, starting with like that he was a letterman in football back when he was in college. And they found all of this stuff out that he had faked, and he was fired from the Notre Dame job. He was the coach at Notre Dame for like 2 weeks or something before he was fired, right? So just be honest, right? So once you're accepted, what should you do? First, take all of your visits, right? Large graduate and PhD programs are going to pay to fly you to their department to meet the faculty, see the department, talk to students, right? The application process for graduate schools is weird, particularly PhD programs in science, in that on the front end, you're trying to have them accept you and want you. But once they have decided that they're accepting you, they try really hard to get you to pick them. So on the front half, you're trying to get the schools to pick you. And then on the back side of it, after you've been picked, all the schools kind of then fight for you, right? So they're going to fly you out, have you meet faculty, take you out to dinner. They're going to treat you really well. Do this, right? If you have to like pay to take a visit, if it's not like financially like ruinous, you should definitely do it, right? Because every department that I've ever been in has its own personality, its own vibe. And if that vibe doesn't mesh with you, you're not going to be happy there, right? So you need to go see the department and find out what's going on. right? You're making a major life decision, like do the research and treat it as a major life decision. So I had a student who got into Scripps in La Jolla, which is in Southern California. And he was like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to go on my visit. And I sat him down with Google Maps and I showed him where Scripps was and the fact that it was like 500 yards from the Pacific Ocean and it's on the Pebble Beach golf course. I'm like, dude, it's paradise. They're going to fly you to paradise for free. Just go. And he went and he came back and he's like, that department was way too intense for me. I don't really think I would like it there. It's like, okay, cool, but at least and you got a free trip out of it. So just take all the visits that you can so you have a good sense of where you're going for the next 4 to 8 years, right? Make sure that you meet with the faculty that you're interested in working with, right? See if they're actually taking students this year. See if they're interested in you, right? If they tell you like, oh yeah, I have a spot, that's not 100% a guarantee because it could be like, yes, they would take you in a normal year, but they end up with, 4 great applicants and you're kind of fighting in a scrum. So don't just say like, well, so-and-so said that I had a spot. Like that's not always 100% true. Also, this is sometimes you'll go and you'll meet with someone and you'll be like, oh my gosh, I could never work for this person. We had a student that got into a university, had met the faculty member at a conference, and then when she went for her visit, was like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible human being. I can't work for this person. And had to think, like, do I still want to go to this school? Is there someone else I could work with? And she ended up going and being happy, but like just knowing like before she had to make her final decision, like, you know what, I don't know if I like this person, was good to know. Also talk to the current graduate students about the faculty. They're going to be honest. They're going to tell you if the person is good to work for, how they treat their students, right? You might have a faculty member that's never graduated a PhD student before. And the current graduate students will be able to tell you why that has happened. Like, just so you have a better sense and a more informed decision. Professional schools after you're accepted. Make sure you visit the school if you didn't visit for an interview, just to get an idea of personality. Figure out which school fits best for you in terms of how they structure their program, how they grade things, what the expectations are, right? Where are you going to get the best possible training? In medical schools and dental schools and stuff, ranking is not as important, but to like shift gears, like law schools, if you don't go to one of the top like 10% of law schools in the country, it becomes really difficult for you to get a job. So if the field you're going into, if rank really matters, make sure you take that into account when you're looking at where you're going to get the best training. And now here is where can you afford it for professional school matters. I think that when you're doing your applications, I don't think that you need to worry about how much the school costs until you've been accepted, right? So if you think the best place for you is the most expensive place, just apply. And if you get in, great. Now you have to make that hard decision of, okay, now that I've done my visits and talked to everyone, do I still think this place is best for me based on the cost, when there's another school that's 95% as good, but only half the cost, right? So I think don't worry about cost until you're accepted and you're making a decision, and then really start to think about it. So don't like preclude applications on the front end, but consider cost on the back end once you're making a decision on where to go, right? Now, we've got to pay for more school, right? Most of us aren't rich like Randy Moss, so we can't pay for things straight cash, homie, right? Right? We got to get money somehow. We got to be like SpongeBob. Got to get money, right? Gucci Mane told me I got to get the bag. So how are we going to get money for this, right? How are we going to pay for this, right? Again, PhD programs, you should not pay, right? Do not pay to get your PhD in science, right? Other PhD programs, oftentimes they will have TA positions available to help defray the cost or work on other parts of campus. I know, again, back in the cave days, there were graduate students when I was an undergrad that worked at the student union to help pay for some of her tuition as like a work study type position, right? In other fields other than science, like loans might be a necessary evil to get your PhD. And again, if it's important to you, if it's what you want to do, that's something you have to consider and decide if you're going to do. Professional schools, loans are usually the most common way to pay. There are some other ways to do it. So for graduate school, oftentimes if you're in the military, there'll be programs within the military that will help pay for graduate school. Industry, this is, I think, way less common than it used to be, but there are certain companies that may pay for you to get a master's degree while you're working for the company. There used to be companies that would pay for you to get your PhD, like would give you a reduced salary while you were getting your PhD, but you would promise to come back and work for the company for a set number of years after the fact. There are grants. The NSF does a lot of these. This is where I get to brag about my former students. Dylan King, who was an INBRE student with us, 3 years ago now, when she went to graduate school at Duke, she got an NSF pre-doctoral fellowship. The funding rate for those is about 10%. So they're really competitive, but she basically has a large chunk of her graduate career paid for. And because of that, she was super sought after for a bunch of faculty because she could buy her own equipment, she could buy her own supplies, she could pay for herself for a number of years. So that just made it so she had kind of her choice of where she wanted to go. And then David Laws, another one of my students, recently applied for an NSF graduate fellowship. I haven't heard if he got it or not. These things, these NSF awards, are typically things that you have to do once you've been accepted in the department. So you've been accepted into the program, and then you write your grant, like the pre-doctoral fellowship, you then write it about what you'd be doing in that program. So it's not something you can do kind of before the fact. Oftentimes, departments or the university itself will offer incentives to you to pick their school, right? So the department may have a small scholarship fund or travel money to help you go to conferences that they might offer you if they are particularly interested in having you come to that department. David, where he went to graduate school, was awarded a higher stipend because they were interested in having him come there, and was received an award for being in the top, like at the very top of the entire graduate class for Emory. So there will be things that they will do to help at the university level to kind of help you at least somewhat pay for school. For professional school, there's the military option. Like we often know about, right? You can have the military help pay for your medical or dental or pharmacy school. There's also the National Health Service Corps. The National Service Corps, you get paid when you're in school, and then they give you, and then you pay them back on the back end. So you work for 4 years in, you go to school for 4 years and do your residency, and then you work for 4 years in an underserved community, and you just don't pay for medical school at all. So you can start these programs once you start. So National Health Service Corps, you get accepted and you can apply, and then they will accept you and then basically cancel your loans and then pay for you to go to medical school. You can do it after you start, like in your 3rd or 4th year. You can apply, and they will like put you on a loan repayment program once you come out. Or you can do National Health Service Corps after graduation. You can apply and get into a loan repayment program where if you work in an underserved area, they might pay, $50,000 a year towards your medical school debt to help you defer some of those costs. My wife did the National Service Corps program, but where she applied before she started. So she has no student loan debt and is currently about halfway to a third of the way through her service. She's almost 2 years into her 4-year service plan. There are other ways. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are just some things to think about. And I have personal experience with the National Host Service Corps. Now, GIGO. GIGO is an old computer term and mathematics term. It's short for garbage in, garbage out, which means for computer stuff, the quality of data or information you get out of a computer program or out of a math equation is directly related to how good the data is going in. If you put in good data and you have a solid program or a solid math theory, you're going to get good information out of that process. If you put in bad information, you're going to get out bad information. You put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out of your process, no matter how good it is, right? So I think that graduate school, professional school is exactly the same way, right? Spooky. Right? So the harder you work, the more rewarding and the more you're going to get out of the training that you're going to receive, right? You're just going to have a better experience, right? Now, there are some schools that have just more opportunities that are just easy for you to get to. But if you work hard, kind of no matter where you go, you're going to be able to like wring the opportunities out of that school or out of that situation that are going to make you as good as you can be, right? So even if you apply yourself and you're really dedicated at like a so-so school, you know, directional tech, southeastern, eastern west, Oklahoma State College or whatever, right? You can be a much better scientist, doctor, professional than if you're just like kind of a slacker who kind of sleepwalks through stuff and really doesn't do a whole lot at a really good school like Harvard, right? So if you put in a lot of effort, you're going to get a lot out of it. It's going to be way more rewarding, right? And just at the end, I think that it's important to remember that whether you're applying to college or graduate school, professional school, right? Your goal in this whole process isn't to be accepted, right? Your goal is to be the best scientist or professional you can be, right? So getting the most out of your training is what matters. So as long as you go somewhere and work really hard, you're going to, you know, hopefully be good at what you do, right? So don't look at it as like, I've got to get into med school. No, your goal is to be a good doctor, right? Is to get through that whole process. So don't get so hung up on getting in that you lose sight of the fact that there's still 4 years worth of work and stuff to get to your ultimate goal. Because I think a lot of people kind of lose sight of the goal of being the professional for the goal being getting into school. All right, so this is a little scary, but for all of you, you've already started your application for the next step, whatever that is, right? Everything you've done is building your application. So your freshman year, when you like partied a whole lot and got a 2.5, that's still on your application, right? So those things are all happening. Everything that you've done has been building your application, right? You need to take time to learn about the program before applying and after being accepted, right? You're going to spend 4 to 7 years where you're going to be as happy as possible. Now, I come from an older school of graduate school, which was not a whole lot of happiness. My students that have left and gone on to graduate school all seem pretty well adjusted now. But I always say that graduate school is not about being super happy. It's about being challenged and being kind of pushed to your limits so you can figure out what you're able to do, right? Right? When you're pushed to kind of the edge, that's where you find out what you can actually do. If you're just super comfortable all the time, you're not really learning what your outer limits are and what you're able to like sit down and really focus on, right? And finally, graduate school is challenging, but it's also rewarding, right? So you might remember Floyd Money Mayweather, right? So everyone is blessed with a certain talent. You have to know what your talent is, maximize it, and push it to the limit. And that's what graduate school, professional schools do, right? If your talent is science, the way that you hone that and push it is you go to graduate school. If your like talent is helping people, right, you go to medical school or dental school or pharmacy school, and that's how you like learn how to do that as best you possibly can. And also, this is just a warning on the way out. Being a doctor is not easy. So this is my wife. You have to do continuing education. My wife went to a weekend program for, I forget what it was, right? Mental health and pediatrics care. This entire book that is thicker than the quarter I'm holding up against it, they went through that plus the 3 books that are on the, that my wife was holding up in a weekend. So even when you are a doctor, the learning doesn't stop. And